Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy, and I am not an Instagram influencer, okay? I'm not here to sell you anything, and I really just want to be raw and authentic and tell you my story because my friend Colleen is going through it. And I want to not just support her, but also speak out because what I went through with the same man that she recently divorced led me to where I'm at today. And that relationship left me spiritually, financially, emotionally, physically broken. And so I'm here today to share that in hopes to give a little insight on the type of habits and behaviors that were present while I was dating this man. We're going to call him Junior. Junior and I met in 2018, in early 2018, and I believe it was March. And we met through Tinder. And we met on his profile. It said he was 38 years old. It said he had a job, and it looked like he, was doing well for himself. So I thought, okay, this is a guy who might potentially be a great partner. So we chatted it up a little bit online, and then we decided to meet, and we went out for dinner. And in that first date, he said a little bit of things about marketing that I felt were kind of near and dear to my heart, coming from a family of compulsive buyers and consumerism. So he kind of gave me this vibe that he understood the downfalls to marketing and understood how unethical marketing can be. And I really thought he was this really honest, amazing man. So we went out on a second date. But in the meantime of the first date and the second date, I did a little Googling. And just to kind of see who this man was. He said he was in the cannabis industry and that he held some events. So I did a little bit of my own, research, being a single woman, wanting to know that, I was safe. And what I found was I found a title, a house, a property title, and it had had a name, a woman's name on it, and his name. But then I also came across a birth date that it said that when he was born. And when I added up the dates, I thought, well, that's weird. He said he was 38, but this online is showing me that he's 40. So maybe it's a misprint. I don't know. We went out, and obviously that wasn't a big enough red flag for me. So I went out on a second date. Second date was March 17th. It was St. Patrick's Day. We met at a little bar, a little hole-in-the-wall bar on the river in Tampa. And we had a few beers. And while we were drinking, he said, there's something I need to tell you. And I said, what? And he said, when I told you my age, I shaved off a couple years. And I laughed. I said, I know. And he kind of was taken aback, and he's like, what do you mean you know? And I said, well, I Googled you, and I found that out, but I have to know why. Why would you lie about your age? And he said, well, I just felt really kind of shitty. I just turned 40, and I just didn't think anybody would want to date, a 40-year-old man. And that's still I remember that conversation, and I remember thinking that's so silly, because even the age group that I was interested in on the dating site it went up to 45. So because I was 33 at the time. And so I kind of brushed it off, and I said, but now that you've told me a lie, I kind of want to ask you some more serious questions. And so I did. I asked him, are you married? Or I said, sorry, scratch that. I said, do you have kids? And he said, yeah. And I almost spit my beer out because having children was kind of it wasn't necessarily a deal breaker at that time, but it wasn't something that I wanted, honestly. I wanted to be in a relationship with no kids. I didn't have any kids, so whatever. And I said, oh, how many do you have? And he said, I have a 4-year-old and I have a 9-year-old or 8-year-old. I think his little boy was 9. It was like 9 and 5 and 9. Anyway, and I thought, oh gosh, me being me, if you didn't know, I am super passionate about adverse childhood experiences. I'm currently in school right now to become a therapist. I'll eventually have my license. But just for the record, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not a counselor. So I'm not here to give advice or anything. I'm really just here to tell my story in hopes that it brings some support for Colleen, and some insight about who this man is and the behaviors and the characteristics and just the experiences that I had. So that was already off the bat. I was like, oh, he's got kids. And then I said, oh, well, so have you ever been married? And he said, yeah. And I was like, oh, fuck, it just keeps getting worse. And he's like, I said, well, are you divorced? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, how long ago were you divorced? Because I was thinking, he's got such young kids. And he said, well, we got divorced in October. Now this was March. So I counted on my hand. I was a little drunk, I was like, okay, October, November, December, January, February, March. Ooh, it's so fresh. And I said that. I was like, ooh, that's a fresh divorce. And he said, well, we've been separated for 4 years. And I thought about his child, and I was like, so you had a baby, and you got a divorce at, gosh, like how sad. Like as a child of divorce, it was already really hard for me to hear that. But nonetheless, okay, I still dated the guy. In fact, that night I told him that I'd really like to go see his place. I'd like to go and see where he lives. And he was really nervous about that. He was like, well, just so you know, I'm really embarrassed about this, but, I'm currently living in my office. And I thought, well, that's weird. Like, why? Why are you living in your office? And his story was that he had just left the house that him and his ex-wife had. He had moved out. He was living in like some back room, and then that wasn't working out. So he moved into his office space so that he can get on his feet, right? But when I got to his office, he didn't have a bed. He didn't have a dresser. Like all of his clothes were just kind of like shoved in the closet. When I tell this story, I honestly, like, I'm sure some of you are thinking, girl, and you still went out with him? And yeah, I sure did, because what I knew then, what I know now, I didn't know then, okay? I didn't have very good boundaries. I didn't have deal breakers. I was 33 years old, and I was just trying to figure it out, okay? So, bear with me. Okay, so I ended up dating him, right? I lived in Tampa, he lived in Riverview, and I treaded lightly because I knew there was children involved, and I wanted to be really extra careful because as a child of divorce, I totally understand like the back and forth and how confusing that can be for children. So I was really, really compassionate when it came to offering him space to still see his kids and do all of that. But it seemed really strange to me. So the next thing that was strange is that he was only allowed to see his children for like a few hours every other day. And so I would ask him about that. I'm like, why do you only see your kids for a few hours a day? And you have to go and pick them up. Like, she doesn't bring them to you. That's very weird. And his story was that in the divorce, that's what the parenting plan was, because he didn't have his own place, because at the time when they got the divorce, he was actually living in the house still that they all lived in. And so that's what the judge came up with. And I'm going to tell you right now, like that was a big alarm that went off in my head, because as a child of divorce, I knew that judges didn't do that. Judges didn't like give one parent only a limited time, unless there was like neglect, drug abuse, physical abuse, some sort of like big issue, right, with the parent. So I told him that. I was like, look, this doesn't make sense. Like, why are you only getting to see your kids like for a couple hours? You take them to dinner and then you drop them off. Like, that's weird to me. And he would become more and more defensive because I didn't believe the stories. Like, it's not that I didn't believe the stories. The stories that he would tell me just didn't make sense. And again, I was 33. I was like, okay, well, I'm making a big deal about it, whatever. Like, it's his issue. Like, I'm going to go just do my life, right? Like, I wasn't involved with his business. I'm just going to live my life. He's going to do his thing. But the more and more time that we spent together, the more and more questions I had. And so I would ask questions naturally, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And he would get really defensive and he'd say, this sounds like an interrogation. Like, why are you interrogating me? And you're always asking questions. And, I started to think that maybe, me asking the questions like was a problem. Because it was a problem for him. He didn't want to be questioned. So needless to say, okay, we dated. About 3 months into my relationship with him, he finally bought a bed. And I think he had bought a couch at the time. And I was spending the night at his office home and with my dog, Piper. And Piper had like a really high prey drive. So she really couldn't be like left alone. And one night I spent the night at his house. I think it was May 1st, May 2nd. We stayed up really late talking about his ex-wife and how she was really into witchcraft. And I am not totally unknowledgeable about witchcraft and the magic and the realm and the energy and all of that. So I kept thinking, this is probably why your life looks like this, because she's very upset, and that's a lot of energy. And so we stayed up all night talking about spirituality, and he kept telling me that was all woo-woo and he didn't believe in it. Well, the next morning I woke up and I woke up to him calling for my dog. And I thought, well, I was like kind of out of it. I said, where's Piper? And he said, I don't know. His story was that he let Piper out into his backyard, which was unfenced, and she was playing with her bunny. She was playing with a stuffed animal, and his phone went off inside the office. So he turned around, looked at his phone, and it was a text message. And at the same time that he looked at his phone, he heard a car accident out front. He looked out his front window and he saw that it was just a minor fender bender. But then when he looked back, Piper was gone. So I asked him over and over again, well, how long ago was this? And he was like, it just happened. It was just now. And I said, well, if it was just now, where are the 2 cars that got into an accident? Like there's no cars out there. And he's like, you don't believe me? Like, you don't believe me? And I'm like, no, dude, I don't. It's not that I don't believe you. I'm just trying to find my fucking dog. All right. Like, so can you just tell me the timeline so I can figure out how far away she is? So long story, kind of short. We spend the next hour looking for my dog, only to find out that she was actually, so he starts calling animal hospitals. And I'm like, why are you calling animal hospitals? And he's like, I'm trying to cover all bases. Turns out she was hit in front of his house by a car, and a bystander saw it happen. They pulled over, picked her up, and she died on the way to the hospital. This event put me into straight up trauma response. I was unmanageably emotional. I was emotionally unstable. I lost my mind. I couldn't understand what was happening, and it was kind of all in slow motion. I'll never forget it. It took me years to even talk about this without crying. I spent the next week at my mom's house because I didn't want to go home to see her empty bowl and her leash, and I couldn't do it. So in that time of spending at my mom's house, he came over to my mom's and just said sorry, and that he it wasn't, he didn't mean to leave her unsupervised. And at the time, I really didn't want to believe that he saw her get hit. Like, he told me he didn't see her get hit, that he only heard an accident. And today, I believe, I'll never be able to prove it, but I believe he saw it. I believe he saw it happening, and then didn't know what to do. And so he just kind of pretended to, because the way he reacted was very defensive, and he didn't want to give me all the, I could sit here till I'm blue in the face. But I still stayed with him after that. But I was so upset. I missed work. I just lost my dog, and it was just me and her. Like, she was like my support animal. So I stayed with him, and that was in May. My lease was up in July, and I could either renew my lease or get another place. And I really only rented that place out because it had a backyard. Well, now that I didn't have a dog, I really didn't need the extra space. So he and I discussed actually moving in together and getting our own place together. So in July of 2018, I moved in with him in his office, okay? And by that time, I had been such a short amount of period of time being with him, and so much had happened, that I didn't really, I don't know, I smoked a whole lot of weed, he'd give me CBD. I would just smoke weed and numb the pain, really. So his son's birthday is in August. So in August, I planned this amazing 10th birthday, right? Planned this birthday, and I think it was either the day of the birthday or the day after. I can't remember, but it was just right around his son's birthday. He says, there's something I need to tell you. And I'm like, oh, God damn it, what is it? And he's like, I didn't want to tell you this when we first started dating, but, now you're involved with my kids and stuff. So I think you should know that I'm actually still married. I can't stress this enough. Lies, instability, and all of that loss truly created an environment of trauma and distrust, not my previous trauma. Now, what's even crazier than that is that I stayed still after this. And in October of that year, we rented a place together in Tampa on the river, where his kids can actually stay. It was a 3-bedroom house, and I don't know. By that time, I honestly was, this person who I thought I was dating didn't even exist. We're reaching the end of the time limit here, so if you want to hear more, I'll post a part 2. Okay. Thanks for listening.